So, today we're going to be taking a look at the Ultimate Game Boy. Now, you can't really have the Ultimate Game Boy unless you know a little bit about the previous versions that the Game Boy had. So, we're going to take a little look at the first Game Boy. Just the original Game Boy. It was released in 1989 in the USA, and it was black and green on the screen with no backlight, and I think it only showed 4 shades of gray. Now, despite this, it still sold like hotcakes. Then you move on to the Game Boy Color. Now, this actually had several different color palettes it could choose from, and in my opinion has some of the best Game Boy games that were ever released, even though it had the shortest lifespan out of the 3. Now on to the original Game Boy Advance. Now, there were 3 versions of this Game Boy Advance, but I'm going to be focusing on the original one because I believe it has the best ergonomics out of the 3. Now, this one was a big shock because whenever it came out, people called it the portable Super Nintendo. And as I'm a little inclined to believe that, the lack of a backlit display absolutely killed this thing. And this revision of the Game Boy Advance was the shortest one also. So let's take a closer look at the actual original Game Boy Advance. So the ergonomics are awesome. I like how you can hold it from the left and right side instead of having the screen above and your hands below. It keeps your hands from cramping up from, extended gameplay. But as you can see right here, the screen is just awful. It does not make you want to pick it up and play it nowadays when we're so used to smartphones and PS Vitas and even the Switch. Because even in this well-lit room right now, you just can't hardly see what's going on, and the camera's picking it up just about how my eyes are in this situation. And another big downfall of this thing was, even though the audio quality was good, the volume level was so low you almost had to wear headphones if you wanted to hear anything at all, or just be in a silent room. So we're going to fix all of that. Number 1 up on this list is the Easy Flash Omega. Now, you couldn't have an Ultimate Game Boy unless you had a Game Boy that could play multiple games off one cartridge. So this is perfect for that. It runs about $50 on Amazon, and it's also compatible with the DS and DS Lite and comes with an additional housing for the DS Lite so it sits flush. This is going to enable us to play the original Game Boy, the Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance in native resolutions with color palettes. Here's a little closer look of it in the flesh. Now, it's a little bit higher quality than I thought it was going to be. The plastic's nice, it has that clear kind of finish on it, which I think is always cool, and I don't know if you can see it, but it actually has a backup battery built into it too. So you can either save through save slots in the emulator on the RAM, or you can save directly to the board with the battery, just like you would any normal game. Which makes it perfect for this situation for the Ultimate Game Boy because you don't have to remember save slots or have to remember to do a redundant save in case you're afraid of it crashing or something like that. You'll always be backed up from the original save that the game focused on in the first place. Now on to the piece de resistance. This is my modded Game Boy Advance. Now I went with a Super Famicom aesthetic here, which I think just complements Nintendo nostalgia perfectly. And it also has a glass front screen instead of the plastic also, so you don't really have to worry about it getting scratched up as easy as the plastic would on the original. But I guess it's a trade-off because you do need to worry about it cracking now, but I really doubt that'll ever happen. So it's got custom shoulder buttons, custom housing, custom fascia buttons. It even has a Game Boy Advance sticker on the back still, just no barcode, but I'm thinking about adding the barcode from my original one to it just to have it there. Now, the things that this does the best are the audio has an amplifier and a replacement speaker put into it, so it's quote-unquote 400% louder than the original Game Boy. But let's pop that Easy Flash cartridge in there and check it out. So as you can see, the screen looks sick. It's nice and bright, the colors are accurate, the viewing angle is also awesome. And as you can see, you've got your root folder with Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color. The images folder is for thumbnails when going through the Game Boy Advance menu. And then you use your shoulder buttons to scroll over menus. Now you can add add-ons and you can add cheats and save states with this also. but we're just going to take a look at gameplay. So you can add thumbnails to all the Game Boy Advance games, and if y'all are interested on how to do that, drop me a comment and I might make another video on how to get this thing configured properly, because there's not that much info on the manufacturer website, and you also need to update the firmware. It crashes pretty commonly. But let's check a game out on Game Boy Advance and see how it runs. So we're going to go with Pokemon on Game Boy Color. Now you'll notice here that it's adding some borders from the Super Game Boy, which is super cool. And you can go through these on the menu too, and you can have it auto select, which is what the Super Game Boy would do just normally, or you could add custom ones if you feel like. But the important thing here is that the aspect ratio is still the same as the original Game Boy, so the pixels look right. They're not stretched, there's nothing weird going on. You can set speed hacks, you can change the color palettes if it's an original Game Boy game, not a color. Now, let's go back to the root menu. Let's go down to... If you hit start, it takes you to your recently played list of games also, which is super handy. If you don't want to dig through, if you have a lot of ROMs, dig through the menus of it. Alright, now let's go with the Game Boy Advance game and check it out. So this system is also awesome for playing actual ROM hacks on physical hardware. There's just something cool about getting a fan-made ROM hack and being able to play it on an actual Game Boy Advance. So this was a fan-made ROM hack from 2014 that was built off of the Pokemon Emerald. And I've heard that this is actually one of the coolest Pokemon ROM hacks there are. But check out the viewing angles on this. Like, the backlight's perfect, the color's perfect, there's no ghosting. It goes a little bit off when you look at it from the bottom, but left and right viewing angles are just perfect. Animation's perfect. Also, the sound quality, even though they've boosted it a little bit, is still intact. Like, it doesn't crack or clip or go out of sync or anything like that. Sounds just like it should. Games load up as expected, run as expected. I mean, for 50 bucks, it's a pretty wicked little accessory that you can buy. Especially if you have a bigger collection of Game Boy Advance games and you don't want to continuously switch back and forth between cartridges to play games. If you own them, just dump all the ROMs on that cartridge. It also emulates NES, and you can put original NES games on it. But as you can imagine, the screen resolution of the Game Boy Advance is not as high as a TV is, so it has to do some trickery to make it look appropriate on it. But even though it's crunching it, you can still tell what's going on, and text is still readable too. Like, let me run up to this guy and talk to him. Oh. Yeah, see, the text is still visible even though it's almost cutting a third of the pixels down. And you can also adjust that. If you, for some reason, need it to stretch and be the original image size, you can. You'll just have most of the game screen hanging off, invisible to you. And there are just tons of settings that you can play with in these little built-in emulators, and really it's very surprising the Game Boy Advance's native processor is enough to actually run that without it, you know, losing speed and dropping frames, because it is just smooth. Now here's an original Game Boy game, and like I was saying before, you can change the color palettes on them, but by default it's gonna try and choose the best one it thinks is for that game. I don't know if this one's choice is that good. Green background with blue trees, but just runs perfect. And if you wanted to change the background colors, you could totally go into there and just change the palette to whatever you want. You can also tell it to choose Super Game Boy by default, or to operate as a Game Boy Color, or to default to telling the cartridge, or the ROM in this case, that it is a Game Boy Advance. Because some games, like Oracle of Seasons, have secret areas for if it knows that it's being played on a Game Boy Advance. So I'm just going to boot this up and sit it down, and we're going to bring back the original Game Boy and take a look at it in comparison. Here she is. Now, I've had this one for a long time, and it does have some weird, I don't know if it's paint or something like that in the face of it, but... So I've got the volume all the way up, even though it's playing a NES game on the new one, and I've got the volume all the way up on the other Game Boy Advance also. You've got to actually turn the volume off of the new one to even be able to hear the old one. I will show you one more thing to look out, though, is you've got to check and make sure your ROMs are actually good. So I'm going to go ahead and load up the same game I have physically playing on the old one on the new one, and you'll notice it comes up like you'd think it would. It comes up like normal. But we're only getting the lightning sound effect, no background music. Then if I go ahead and try to enter the game, the audio is just broken. So you're going to have to do some quality control whenever you're dumping ROMs on here too. Don't take for granted just everything will run perfect, because you never know how long ago that ROM got ripped, or if it got ripped from a good cartridge or not, or just too many variables. Try it first on your PC on an emulator before you take the time to dump it onto that cartridge. But this thing was actually a pre-mod from a company called retrosix, and they're out of the UK. And you can pick these up for about 130 bucks, but it is another like 30 bucks for the international shipping. But still, the quality of this is way better than trying to risk buying a pre-modded one off of eBay, and usually this one for 130 runs cheaper than the ones on eBay do anyway. And I think they're using a better screen, because I've noticed most of the ones on eBay are using the first gen SP's color screen, backlit screen, and that one is just not worth the trouble of paying that much money for it. This one is using the AGS 101 screen. I'll drop a link in the description to the manufacturer's website of this, because they're really cool guys, and let me know if you guys have any of these or what your stories are with them.